Hey guys, Kevin Purcell here for Theotek podcast, and this is our 15th official 15th episode. Um, as all my phones go off because it just hit 9 o'clock. But anyway, we are here today. We're kind of down by one. Wes couldn't join us this week, but our good friend Antoine Wright is here with us. Antoine, how are you doing this morning?
Hello, everybody, from a bowl of cinnamon toast crunch.
The breakfast of champions, as I can see. Well, good. Well, we want to get right into it. Last week we ended our podcast with a discussion that all of us really found interesting, and it was talking about a church social media policy. Explain what that means, Antoine.
So the challenge for every at least the administrative side of churches, of church leadership, is to understand that there is social media out there, the Twitter, the Facebooks, the Pinterest, etc., that are out there, but there are also some rules of governing yourself individually, and that will reflect or end up reflecting on your community. And so we kind of looked at, I think five of them, five rules that we jumped out at, or five things that you should have as part of that social media policy. And like you said, Kevin, it was really a good discussion, and that's hence why we're kind of going to continue on it on this week. You got it highlighted on the screen there. Honor God with what can be seen and not seen. We noted as number one. This idea that yes, it's digital, but you're doing this in front of God, and there's no such thing as private browsing when it comes to God. Number two there was honor your brothers and sisters with all communications, whether those are seen or not seen. And so again, because we're in a digital space, and we kind of do want to understand that the things that we put out there, they may or may not be seen. You might have them behind lock and key. You might be using Snapchat or something else of that sort. But just because you're using something that goes away from the way you see it doesn't mean that they won't ever see it. So you want to honor your brothers and sisters in the faith with that. And we spoke at that point, those first two really are admonishments to be digitally mindful of the greatest commandments. Honor God with everything you got, and then love your neighbors, you love yourself. As Jesus so well put it. But those two, they have a place at the top of anybody's social media policy. We went to number three after that. Understand that your actions will reflect yourself, your family, and your church family, because you are ambassadors of Christ. And it's not a do or do not, but it's Proverbs talks about in all thy getting understanding, and as much as we want to get our word out or get our perspective out about a particular item or a particular situation, we have to understand that the things that we speak or the things that we say, things that we do online, they all have an effect on people far beyond ourselves. Number four, we put down there is treat everything that you put on the internet as public, no matter where you put it. And so it kind of sounds like number one and number two all over again. But after every breach of every major bank and UPS and Michaels and Staples and Target, et cetera, and and matter of fact, somebody just found 1 million passwords on GitHub for WordPress blogs, and somebody else just found a whole group of passwords for other applications on GitHub. I mean, it doesn't matter what we do online, but we have to treat it, even if it's not connected online. If that computer is connected online, we need to treat it as if it will go public, and pay attention to what we're doing there. And then the last one we talked about before we broke was back up all of your social communications yourself. And that's that got us in a really good topic of discussion of how hard is it to do something like that? Why should the onus fall on the individual, not just on the ministry? The ministry should be backing those things up, but there should be an individual onus as well to back up your social media communications and be taught well on how to do it. This is an area where the church really does have an ability to be leader or set leadership, servant leadership in this respect of teaching folks how to back up things properly. So in the inevitable case that something does get destroyed or there are some legal implications, that you do get some kind of, you do have a backup in place so that you can research and see those items. So those are the 5 things that we chatted about, that we started with, and those 5, before talking about anything specifically that are in some specific church media policies, those 5 are really the very top of what any social media policy should look like.
Yeah, I think going back to these first 2, basically are honor your brothers, or honor God and honor your brothers, are, love God and love your brothers. We said that the greatest commandment. It's also just good spiritual citizenship, obviously, but I like these 5 because really the 3 top ones, which if that's all you followed, the last 2, or the 4th one rather, wouldn't be that important, because if you followed the first 2 or the first 3, then whether it's public or private, there wouldn't be anything to be ashamed of. Now I think there's some issues, that you might discuss things. You're still honoring God and you're still honoring your brothers and sisters, and you can still do that and discuss private issues, and you should be careful about doing such a thing. But anyway, what I like about these 3, the first 3, is this is a theological framework, as we talked about last week, a theology of technology that takes that and embraces it. By putting those as the top 3, they say, hey, not only are they the top 3, but that number 1 is the most important one of all of them, and that number 2 is the most important one of all of them, or the second most important. Yeah. As Jesus said, the second one is like it, when he gave the Great Commandment. So we're taking it from a theological perspective, and if we extrapolate from that, we could go into some more detail about what that means and how that goes, but and each church, I think, could probably, or each Christian ministry could probably, get as detailed or stay as general as they like. But those top 5 things really ought to be, at least the top 4, really ought to be, I think, the foundation of every Christian social media policy, regardless of whether you're a church or a parachurch organization, or really just a Christian. I think every Christian should at least take those top 4 and say, hey, this is how I'm going to treat my social media interaction. And we might need to, this is something I just thought of, maybe these things, I ought to put these things on our church's website and put it in our church's Facebook group, and then publish it in other places, just to say, hey, Christians, follow this, just do this, and you'll be all right. Now, getting to that, go ahead.
Well, it's not a bad idea, because there's nothing, if we think about, every denomination in Christendom that we have, there's nothing that any denomination would disagree with those top 2, and really with those top 4. None would disagree. There'd be no disagreements whatsoever. And so having something like that as a banner, or this is the way that we approach Christendom in the digital space, that would be excellent. Would really be excellent.
Well, I commission you to create some beautiful artwork, and we'll put it behind as a document or something like that, and create it and start sending it far and wide, and make this the I don't know what the right term for it, the Christian social media policy for all the internet, maybe.
It's not a bad idea, actually.
You're the one who could do it. I couldn't. I've got about as much visual artistic talent in my body as I don't know what to say. My mind is just not very sharp this morning for some reason, but too early, I guess. That last one that we have on our list, back up your social media communication yourself. That's an interesting one. Can you give me your rationalization? I think this was one that you came up with, or Wes did?
Wes did, but I definitely agree with it that it should be part of that media policy. It's Yes, it's hard. Let me get that part out there. It is an extremely hard endeavor to for the non-techie to think about, oh, I have to back something up. You know, it's kind of something that we in a sense take for granted. You know, our email is out there, and Microsoft or Google or Yahoo, yeah, they back that up. I can go find that if I need it. And, you know, I put pictures on Facebook or Flickr or Pinterest. You know, I don't have to really worry about it, and that's why I'm using those services, because they back it up. They do that portion of things. But I think there's I'm a very, very big proponent of the federated web, or the internet that you own and that you control the access points to, that you're not, you know, letting another company or country control your access to particular items. I think that every individual should maintain, if anything that they create, they should maintain ownership, physical ownership of the things that they create. And so learning how to back up, you know, even if it's something as simple as, you know, using if this then that to take your Facebook public postings and download those automatically into your Dropbox so that it's on your local computer, or take your Flickr pictures and automatically back those up into Google Drive, where they sit on your, you know, on your home computer or home media server or your iPad or whatever. Those are things that I won't say they're basic skills, but they're really close to basic skills. How do we teach digital stewardship? And I think backing up your social media content would be one of those steps of digital stewardship that a social media policy should speak towards.
I just found a blog post from Twitter on their blog about how you can now download your Twitter feed, and I'm going to put that in the show notes. And it's here. Let me.
Twitter did that. I want to say 2 years ago. Was it about 2 years ago that's dated?
Yeah, I vaguely remember it. You know, it's been a while, but here it is. Let's see. Your Twitter archive. It's almost a little more than 2 years. 2012, and it says go to your settings, scroll down to the bottom, check the option to request your Twitter archive. If you don't see it, click the button. You'll receive an email with instructions, and so that might be a good starting point from at least from Twitter's perspective. Go ahead and get everything you've had before, right? And then another way that you can back up Twitter going forward is, you know, we've talked about, I think we've talked about on the podcast IFTTT.
Yeah, if this then that. Love that service.
And this is my IFTTT control panel or settings or whatever. So like I've got my Tumblr that, you know, it goes, actually my website, I post it to Tumblr, I post it to Facebook, I post it to Twitter. A lot of people don't like when you do this, but, you know, it's just there's so many different places now, it's hard to do. But see, one of the things you could do is post like to Dropbox, and then your Dropbox automatically links down to your website or to your hard drive, and so that gives it, you know, the backup space. And then on your personal computer, you could then, if you're nervous about it staying just in Dropbox, you know, you can set up like a syncing software that automatically syncs it to another local drive so that it's already there, or a backup drive, or if you've got a system like on Mac, you know, we've got a pretty simple backup solution, you know, Time Machine, that can back all that up. So, you know, Twitter's easy, I think. It gets a little more difficult with Facebook.
Twitter,
something like that.
Twitter, Flickr, Pinterest, you know, Evernote. There's a lot of services that we use online that offer that same thing that Twitter does, where they just say, hey, you want to request all of the content that you use for us, go here, pull it down. Google actually makes you do it every year. They recommend that you do it, and they just finished a promotion actually a couple weeks ago where if you go through and do your own security audit, which includes checking to see if you want to download all of the content that you've ever put into Google. But you have that opportunity, and it's not something that we should take for granted. Part of steward of our activities in social media environments also has to be, how do we clean up ourselves in those environments? We go to the national park, and there are trash cans there, but we see litter, so those persons weren't being good stewards. They were leaving the wrong thing behind. And so in the same way, we kind of want to look at social media as, we're leaving our words behind, or our pictures, or our content, any way, shape, or form, but there's an opportunity for us to kind of clean that stuff up and bring that stuff closer to home, bring that stuff closer to us, and we should take advantage of that.
Yeah. Did you already say your reasoning why you think this is necessary? As far as it might be a good policy just for your own personal benefit, but when I think of a Christian social media policy,
definitely for a person.
I think of it in the standpoint of something like, hey, look, this is something, in order to present a Christian face on social media, this is what good Christian citizenship is. Why? How does it connect to that?
Well, excuse me. I would probably stick that in the bucket of digital stewardship, or I'll say digital stewardship. I've been trying to get away from the word digital, but we are, our responsibility as believers is not only to be a light, anywhere that we are, but also to have traceable behaviors. Behaviors that somebody can look back on and see, hey, listen, they were earnest about this particular their environment, this particular behavior that they were in. And I believe having a behavior and a culture of also knowing how to back up your items, it's part of that. I would even go as far as saying, there's probably something in that would go in that social media post alongside of that, probably around understanding basic creation tools, or the licenses behind whatever tools that you're using, using the right software, not using illegal software. I would stick it in kind of that kind of bucket. How are you stewarding the things that you're creating that go into that social media space?
Okay, so I think I get that. But I would say that is, to put that in the top 5, it's like 1, 2, and 3. And
it might not be top 5.
Utmost importance, and number 5. Look, try to do this, but it's not a absolute must.
Right.
Like if someone was doing the top 4, they should feel pretty good about themselves that they are putting a Christian face on their social media involvement. If they're doing number 5, they're being wise. So would you agree with that?
I would agree. They would definitely be being wise, and that ends up being what your social media policy, what your internet policies, they end up boiling down to. In past organizations where I've created internet policies, tablet use, and mobile policies, we always started at the very top of that policy with the things that you must do, and then we went down to the things that are wise to do, and then we did after that it was, here are the things that are really optional to do, but if you actually get this far and you do these things, yay. We're happy at that note.
Is there anything you would add, either above or below number 5? Like, we've had a week now to think about this, and from your engagement with this topic, I think you've thought about it a whole lot longer than I have, in a more concerted way. I mean, I've just sort of thought generally about, how do I behave as a Christian, and how do I do that online? I haven't really thought of it that much until recently about how do I do it through social media. But I mean, this has been something that's been on my mind since I first downloaded Microsoft Chat back in the 90s, and I would get involved in that, or AIM, it used to be that AOL Instant Messenger, and I'd hear about kids, doing stuff shady and stuff in their bedrooms through those kinds of things. And now the rumor, the thought is all parents think kids are only using Snapchat to post naked pictures of each other. Which probably isn't true most of the time, but it is. But anyway, I say all that to say, have you thought about, is there anything else that goes below number 4? Because I think we agree those are the top 4.
Yeah, you know,
below number 4 and above number 5, or maybe even below number 5.
yeah.
Is there anything else
Well,
you
I
want?
say below number 4 and above number 5. I would definitely put in there research before you retweet.
Oh, okay, good
You know,
point.
yeah, you know, you don't just retweet. You don't just you don't just copy again a link to anything. You know, every 5 minutes some celebrity dies on social media. You know, and it's so fast to fly around social media because nobody investigates it and sees what's going on. You know, and even the New York Times and the BBC and the Guardian, they're guilty of retweeting before they research at times. You know, it doesn't happen as often. They've got those checks and balances in place, but that's a really, really, really important point. You know, before you retweet, research.
That's true, especially like on Facebook and where people can post a lot more content than that quick 140 characters, and you constantly see that, oh, Madeline Murray O'Hare, she's trying to take In God We Trust off the internet or off the dollar bill, and there's a rule by the FCC that they're trying to stop Christian television and Christian radio, and now Christian internet sites is the thing, and I mean, there's just a ton of this stuff. A good website that people probably know about is Snopes.com and Urban Legends.
Yep.
I think it's about urbanlegends.about.com or something like that. There's a few others like that are really good. When I see that kind of thing, my little meter in my head that says, yeah, probably not real, probably not, and I go check them real quick. And I've found myself constantly saying to my friends, my church friends, not often, but sometimes even family, saying, hey, this is just a bunch of bunk. You need to tell your friends that you posted this, but it's false, and here's the evidence of why it is false. And even then, some people come back at me and say, oh, well, how do they know that's false? And it's like, well, okay, if we want to fight about it, then that's fine. But most of the time, people, when they hear it, their first feeling is they're embarrassed. And then the second feeling is, oh, I need to tell people that I put out the wrong information. On occasion, I get someone who says, whatever, who cares? And that's that we can't be who cares. We've been called to be the salt and light and to be truth tellers. And if we unknowingly spread a falsehood, then we are still lying if we don't correct the falsehood as publicly as we shared it. In other words, if I shared it with just one person, I need to go back to that one person and say, hey, remember that thing I told you about that I saw on the internet? I was wrong. Or, if I posted it on Facebook, I need to post it next to that Facebook post and maybe even another post saying, hey, I was false. That's not true. Madeline Murray O'Hare's dead, by the way. And so it'd be really strange if she... Now, there are probably plenty of people out there that want to get rid of In God We Trust off the dollar bill, but no one with any clout is doing so right now that I know of.
Yeah, it's important. There's a lot of things could be solved. Was it we were given 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason? In the same way for social media. And so the research before you do. I would almost go as far, to say be wary of Christianese. When we're in our social media spaces, yes, we're talking with other believers, but especially if we're in a public space, they might not be aware of some of the words, mannerisms of the Christianese, if you will, that we might say, and so we want to be mindful of that. I say in a sense, I won't say be careful, but be mindful of it. I work part-time at the YMCA, and we get a heaping number of folks who are Muslim, who are Jewish, who are Baha'i, and as much as I can say, because you're in a SEAK, a Christian association, Young Men's Christian Association, I still have to be mindful of how I speak about Christianity or about aspects of Christianity at them. You don't want to offend somebody when you're trying to serve them, and it's the same way with social media.
I would agree with that. I think that that's again, that goes in that lower tier of, I don't think this is a thing that anybody ought to ever get fired over or even reprimanded if it's done. For example, if I had I don't really have a staff at my church. I mean, I've got people who do work and a couple of other who are paid, but like let's say if our music director, he's not involved in social media that I know of, but if he posted on Twitter saying, using this sanctified language, I wouldn't even probably approach him about it. Whereas if he put on Twitter, if he cussed on Twitter, I'd probably pull him aside and say, you may not want to do that. Now, the guy that I'm talking about would never use profanity. I probably am more likely to than he would be, and I don't ever. But so you understand what I'm saying. So I would put that in the lower tier.
Oh,
but,
definitely.
Yeah. What about we're talking about philosophical things. Can you think of anything that's more along the lines of that number 5 that we had on our original list? Of backing things up that are like that. They're wise, but maybe not necessarily that spiritual.
It's something that we over time you kind of just figure out. Some of us, because we're a little more technically enabled, we tend to have an email address that we use for personal things, and then an email address that we use for spam. It's probably not a bad idea not to use your personal email address for social media, but to maybe use that spam email address for it. That's one thing that I would, at least for some of my older folks that are jumping on social media who may not want grandson's pictures coming in next to, here are your 10 best Twitter followers. You may want to have a separate email address for that.
What about like if it's what if it's let's say it's your official church Twitter account? Should you sign up for it with your official church email address?
You should.
And my reasoning, I would say, is I may not be here forever, so the next guy coming who would have access to the official church email address can then also get access to the official church Twitter account. And then the other thing is, like on Facebook, something like that, your Facebook page, you need to make certain that there's more than one administrator, so that if anything ever happens to, and really more than one person needs to have access to those other official church social media things, so that if anything ever happens to me as the pastor, maybe I keel over one day, have a heart attack, and suddenly the church no longer has access to their Twitter account and that kind of thing. We had an issue similar to that where a member of our church that was the official moderator of our church's Facebook group, private Facebook group, got angry and left the church, and none of us had access to it. So we had to have the embarrassing and uncomfortable phone call of, hey, I know you're not happy with us, but can we have our group back? And the person did give it back to us, fortunately, but.
Well, that goes that in terms of part of that group policy is definitely have more than one admin, but also have more. If for organizations, there should always be somebody that verifies a post, a tweet, a picture before that goes up on that organization's social media profile.
Even like in a private group, because like we have our public page, our Facebook page that anybody can see, and then we have a private group. That we keep it private because we want people to be able to feel free to post like a prayer request that they don't necessarily want, any old Joe Schmo seeing it, but they want the rest of the church members.
Oh, no. Oh, I wasn't meaning like that. I was meaning more in the sense of, like you were just kind of addressing somebody to back up, but I was addressing accountability. You can't have just one person as the voice, where you want to make sure that whoever is that social media manager, evangelist, that they have somebody that's checking on them before they post or tweet anything out. So just so that there's accountability in terms of that, and consistency to the messaging that's going out, so that you don't end up with one person's voice overriding the voice of the community.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And one of the things I've had to do, both on my personal website and on our church's website, and then I also help maintain our denominational local association here in our county. I help maintain their website, and unfortunately, we have to turn on moderation for all comments, because then if you don't do that, the spammers are very smart, and they've learned to get past Akismet, which is one of the most popular WordPress spam tools, and they can get a bunch of pornography and other things that aren't appropriate for a Christian website. They can get links on that, and so we've had to do that. But I think those are good policies. Is there anything else? I'm not trying to make this list incredibly long. In fact, I think it would be more effective if it's definitely less than, God made 10 commandments, and I don't think we need more than 10 for social media policy.
Well, I mean, depending on the size of the church and the scope of what they're doing, that media policy may get really large. For a community that does missions work, they'll definitely have a piece in there about respecting the local laws and customs of places that they visit, with how they take pictures or transcribe items that are eventually shared on social media. You'll definitely have a piece in there about how do you represent children in that social media space. Are you allowed to have their pictures taken, or do they all have to be taken from the back of their heads, kind of thing? There's a good deal of churches that deal with that. What do you do from the legal side?
Right there for a second there about the posting of pictures of children.
Yeah.
For the first time since I've been the pastor of this church, I had an issue where we had some people attending our vacation Bible school, and I often take tons of pictures and sometimes some video of our VBS, and then I put it on our Facebook account. And so far, up to this last summer, I never had any blowback from our church families, our parents, and things like that. At least I don't know that anybody was upset. No one ever said to me that was a bad thing. Well, this year we had a family member, not a church member, but a family member of a church member, who brought 2 children or 3 children who were foster kids. And they said,
"Oh,
you can't post any pictures with them in it online." And I was like, "Why not?" And they said, "Well, they're foster kids, and they were removed from the home because of danger in the home, and if the original parents know where they're at, they'll come after them." And I was like, "Whoa, okay. I wonder how many times that's happened in the past that I've violated that kind of trust, And so, what you're talking about there, posting pictures of children, the church needs to have a discussion about that, and at the very least, because there's some legality involved in there, isn't there?
That's correct. And so where the church has to kind of come to the head with that conversation is generally, in a membership doctrine, part of that, one of those pieces of fine print in the church's membership doctrine usually says around media usually says something like, you are giving us the authority to utilize your picture in social media and other printed media to advertise about this church or advertise about our church, and you will express to us in writing if and when anything is inappropriate, or when we cannot use that photo. And so it's really it is a legal issue, but it's one where a church has to kind of be in the front of. It just has to be in the front of. It can't really wait until that situation happens.
So for our part, maybe the media policy that we ought to state is we shouldn't necessarily clarify what that policy should be about posting images of children. We should say, churches, you need to have a policy about posting pictures and video of children on your social media and internet presence.
Yeah, observe, or even simply, let's see, observe, observe your legal responsibilities when posting pictures and videos of children.
Yeah. All
You know,
right.
1, 2, 3. The last legal, there was a legal point that I was going to come to after that. The last one. Um, oh gosh, and I just forgot it. I think I said legal one too many times.
Maybe if I vamp for a minute, you'll get it. I think this is an excellent list, and I really am serious. I wish that you would come up with a nice layout. I'll be happy to wordcraft it, and we can put this together and make it a PDF that we can start publicizing and sharing with people. And I think I'm going to contact Steve Hewitt, who we had on a couple of weeks ago with Christian Computing Magazine, and we're hoping to have Lauren Hunter from Church Tech Today on. We're going to try to work out a schedule where we can do that. She's someone that would be good to help us, disseminate this far and wide. I think we should send it to denominational, because I think this is important. This is why we decided to hit this subject again, even though we talked about it last week. We just kind of tacked it on the end of a long podcast. We wanted to, here we're already more than a half an hour in, and we've discussed it this whole time. I think it's really important that churches and Christians, we're sort of focusing on churches or Christian ministries, but individual Christians themselves need to be mindful of this policy as well.
Exactly.
All right.
I'll stop right there. Let's stop right there, and I mean, let's open it to our audience. If you guys have any other comments towards what could be added, what subjects did we not miss? What are some, as Kevin mentioned earlier, what are some of those things that are not, that are wise to do but not necessarily major items that we should add on there? Definitely tell us in the comments to our notes.
Yeah, put it under the Google Plus page. Put it on our YouTube channel. Tweet us at Theotek News. Send us an email at theoteknews@gmail.com. Go to kevinpurcell.org. Go to mobileministrymagazine.com. Painfullyhopeful.me. That's Wes's site. Please, we would love to get lots of feedback on this issue, because I think producing a really solid sort of 10 commandments for social media would maybe be a good way to advertise this or publicize it. But if we have 10, I don't know if we've got 10, but I think this is a very, very important thing, and I plan to say a lot about this in all the circles that I have influence in. I'll probably write my next Christian Computing Magazine article about this issue. All right, we wanted to talk about sort of not related, but also back to the idea of churches and their use of technology today. You wrote a good article over at Church Tech Today entitled "Wrapping Your Arms Around Wearable Tech," and this was talking about the biggest craze today. It seems to be wearable technology, things like Fitbits and the Pebble Watch, and Apple Watch is getting ready to be announced next week, or I think it's next Monday that they're going to make the final official announcement before selling it. All of these things are interesting. I personally think the most interesting of all of them was a big flop because of the cost, and that is the Google's what's it called now? I've just forgot the name of their
Glass.
The Google Glass. I thought that was the most interesting of all of them, but no one was willing to pay $1,500 for it. I mean, I'm the guy who way overbuys technology, and I wasn't even willing to pay that much for it. I wanted to, but if it had been $500, I would have jumped all over it. But anyway, all of these things are interesting. So talk to us about this article you wrote. I've got it shared on the screen here.
Yeah, so I wanted to, now being a contributor also to Church Tech Today, Lauren had asked if I can contribute something in that mobile wearable space, and it was interesting as I looked back in my own notes about wearable technologies, and I've been a big fan of this space definitely for the last 4 years plus. I used to have a Microsoft Spot watch, so I can get my little updates of sports and all that stuff going on back in the day when PDAs were popular.
I totally forgot about that thing even existing, the Microsoft Spot. That's great.
Yeah. It's really bad. I actually have a pleasant memory of Microsoft Spot, which is really bad. That's how bad it is on my end. but it's how do when we start talking about wearable technology, we're talking about something a little more personal than mobile devices. With mobile, there's this idea of something that captures our attention. It's in our hand, and to some degree, we're starting to, as a church, we're starting to understand how to be accountable to the little black box in our hand. In some ways. And then now you have, just as you're getting used to that, boom, wearables, kind of come around the corner as the next hot thing. And so I wanted to look at it from two ends. The first end is the way that a lot of us have been hearing about wearable technologies, which is in terms of activity and wellness and fitness. So, Paul says, I have there in the article there, 1 Timothy 4:8, for the while bodily training is of some value, godliness in every way is of greater value. Bodily exercise profiteth little, but it profits something. And so how do we, as a body of Christ, understand wearables in the context of staying in a decent amount of shape? Not trying to be the next Miss America or Mr. Universe or anything of that sort, but how do we be responsible to this temple that God has given us? How to be responsible to our bodies? And I think wearables give us a really good starting point or starting place, especially if you, as a small community, can jump into the same kind of wearable platform. If all of you are on Fitbit, or all of you doing Strava for bicycling, or folks are on MyFitnessPal, everybody can kind of plug in that community and encourage one another in health and wellness together. I think that's it seems contradictory to what Paul says there in 1 Timothy 4:8, but I think it actually does fit with every man taking care of their brother. Being able to see, hey, listen, you walk 10,000 steps, I also walk 10,000 steps. Good job, brother. That's a kind of or a piece of that focus of wearables that I think is definitely usable. And then the second part of that article talked about check-in and child tracking. So, kind of going back to what we talked about earlier about that social media policy, there are some churches that are looking at wearable devices that have been offered for children and using that as part of their child check-in or child check-in or children tracking policy. And, there you have to really cover yourself and making sure you have a decent, very, very decent and legally sound framework for how you're using that technology with children. But it is a way that wearables are being explored so that we can see some benefit to keeping our communities safe, and especially the children in our communities.
That's interesting, because these are two areas that honestly I never, look at me. The fitness tracking side of it, I actually find myself the gamification of the steps. I have a, the Moto 360, and it tells me, hey, you're halfway to your goal for the day. And I don't know, there's just sort of this mini, tiny dose of euphoria that's like, hey, all right, I'm getting there. If I hit that before noon, then I'm feeling really good at myself. Sometimes, though, I hit it like around supper time, and I'm like, oh, man, this is bad. But then when it tells me, like sometimes I'll hit my goal, in the middle of the afternoon or late in the afternoon, and I'm like, way to go, Kevin. And sometimes I don't hit it at all. And so that gamification is something that for someone like me who desperately needs to lose weight, and I have lost, some over the last year, that's a helpful thing. And I think we as Christians, like you said, we do a poor job of keeping ourselves healthy. But this other side, this, children and checking in, that's not something I've even thought about. And the technology that would be required for that, I personally don't see the average church, maybe the few mega churches that could afford it could use something like this, but I really don't see the average church investing in this kind of thing right now. Do you know of anything?
Well,
it's
funny. I agree with you.
This useful?
Well, here's the thing. I agree with you, actually. I don't think any church is going to want to invest in it, but I think Disney did something really cool. I mean, it took them a lot of billions of dollars and a lot of years, and they've come out with the Magic Bands, which, literally speaking, I'm going to geek out on that alone on my next trip to Disney, any Disney. It's amazing. You got a little band that you wrap around, you have around you. It's got your payment in there. It's got your, your room key in there. It's personalized to you. And then especially if you have kids, it's personalized to your kids. So you can only put a set amount of money on there for them. And, when they go around to different places, I mean, they literally would have to take it off for them not to be tracked. And it's not to their advantage to do so, because then they won't have the ability to go, buy things, because they won't be carrying any physical money around, and a few other items. So I think what Disney did there, they kind of gave a piece of a vision as to what tracking and checking in would look like. I do notice, and for years I've noticed, the average age of a child getting a smartphone, or close enough to a smartphone, has been going lower and lower. I believe in the UK 3 or 4 years ago, the lowest age a child was showing up with a smartphone was 6 and 7 years old. I know at the YMCA right now, I'm seeing 6 and 7-year-old kids with smartphones in hand, usually without any parental controls on them. And I do think with some of the things that carriers have put out there, AT&T and Verizon have some very good parental control features for their accounts. You probably could get away with doing some kind of Foursquare-like check-in service for your children's ministry, where kids check in, they get badges, and maybe those badges get them something a little bit extra, or the parents check in with that child with that particular device, whether it's a wearable or a smartphone, and something happens from there. So I kind of think the infrastructure is there. I just don't think we're looking at it in that framework.
Well, I think there's what's the Apple technology? It's not just Apple technology, but Apple has adopted Ibeacon, which is low.
Yeah.
Again, my mind is just not sharp today for some reason. It's a low, something low band Bluetooth technology, low-powered Bluetooth, or something like, I've got these little NFC chips here that I used to use. I don't even think about it anymore, but they're sitting here on my mouse pad. When I first got a phone with NFC, I would come in and scan it over this thing and check in at my church office and turn off the volume on my phone so that I didn't get notifications or phone calls or something like that while I was preaching. And now I don't even think about it. I should, because it would be so much easier. I actually put one on the pulpit of our church. These are little sticker-backed NFC tags, and you can program them. You can program them so that your phone will do something. The problem is, I'm wondering if there's already existing some form of technology that you could put on a phone for smaller churches that couldn't afford to invest in a Disney-style system, where they could the parent could bring their phone, ding, what's your kid's name? Type in, or even have it set up already with the kid's name. Check in the kid. Okay. The problem is that's how they know that they've checked them in. That would help the church, but it doesn't go the other way, where it helps the parent know that the kid is still safe in the nursery. Then you would need some kind of like the things they put on the clothing at the department store to say, hey, you're stealing our, $100 dress or whatever. They need something like that they would, like a band. And I don't know that there's the technology that's cheap that churches, churches could do that. There is?
Yeah, it is. It's actually kind of neat. So you mentioned two pieces. You mentioned NFC, the near field communication, and then you mentioned about Ibeacons. With Ibeacons, that's the newer implementation of the two. Ibeacons are small, low-power Bluetooth antennas, and you don't necessarily even have to touch them, but you just have to be in the presence of them. And those Ibeacons, those little antennas, connect to some kind of check-in system, content management system, and they can be triggered by a smartphone, or can be triggered by like a Bluetooth wristband. Or Bluetooth necklace, something real simple like that. So, that, like you said, that's one part. The other part of that is, if the kid runs out of the room, how do I know if they ran out of the room? The folks that did NFC, They have, made that standard is really cheap, and I don't want to say cheap, really, really, really inexpensive right now, where you can actually get kits and for 25, 30 bucks, even as far up as $100, you can get thousands of little badges printed, or blank badges where you can print them yourself, where you would have the kids, actually tagged, with a sticker that triggers that iBeacon, which is really neat. What I haven't seen, and what I looked for I didn't see, is that I didn't see any of the check-in software actually utilizing iBeacons, which I thought was kind of weird, but then again, it's also a little bit ahead of thinking. But it is something that could work. Right now, it's something that'll take a little bit of work to put together. But there are NFC bracelets and small Bluetooth bracelets that, from Alibaba and other stores, which are dirt cheap for 100 or 1,000 of them, which could be utilized with an iBeacon to do a simple check-in, check-out. So, it's neat stuff. Oh, Kevin, I think you're on mute. So, a lot of stuff happening out there in this space. When I was in the Netherlands in October, I had a group that showed me what's going on, what's happening new with iBeacon technologies. Really fascinating stuff. They not just having a small beacon, but they were showing how in a retail environment, instead of having those tags on clothing, they were showing small little clips, little NFC clips, that whenever they went past the iBeacon, if the beacon if it passed through the beacon and you had paid for it, then the beacon would just light up a color green or something of that sort to show that you went through. But if not, it would actually trigger the alarm system and the beacon would flash red, which was cool. So that stuff is here-ish. I'll say here, specifically more for retail. Like I said, I haven't yet seen it being utilized by any of the child check-in software.
Yeah, I was muted. Sorry about that. I had a cough while you were talking before and forgot to unmute. This article that I just found is talking about using iBeacon in churches, and it gives 4 possibilities of how it can be used. But still, it seems more, this is supporting the church, not helping the safety of the child, which is the point you were getting at. So it sounds to me like you just said, it sounds to me like we're still a little ways off of making that affordable for the average church. Well, that's interesting. Just talking about the technology itself, the Pebble Time, they just went back to Kickstarter with a new project, and notice it's already at 16 million with a whole 21 days to go. And you can see that I went ahead and backed that, the Pebble Steel Time, which is the more attractive of the two models that they're sharing. I just think that looks good, and personally, I think that looks nicer than the Apple Watch, in my opinion. But is this something that you're interested in? Are you looking to go to one of these, or do you already use one?
I bought a Pebble about a little more than a year ago, and it was too dependent on my phone, so I took it back after a week, and I picked up a wearable called by a company called Polar, based out of Finland, called the Polar Loop, which I thoroughly enjoy. I've had it on my wrist for the better part of a year and a half, and I literally took it off of my wrist for good this week because I am finally used to my new Polar, the Polar M400, which is a pure activity exercise watch. I don't really care to get notifications from any of my social media accounts or text messages or anything of that sort. So I don't necessarily need that part of the smartwatch side of things. But yeah, I pay attention to this space very intently. I do like the idea of wrist technologies. I'm also looking at Ringly, which is a ring-based notification jewel. I guess that's the best way to call it. It basically is a jewel that lights up every time you get a text message or a tweet connected to your phone, which I thought was pretty cool. As well as the Google glasses. Sony just came out with a headset VR model.
What
Wearable
about the one
technology
from
is pretty
Microsoft?
interesting. Oh, the
Microsoft
HoloLens?
HoloLens, yeah, that looks really good because that's not virtual reality, but augmented reality where it lets you see your environment, but then it puts overlays on top of it that you can, like if you're looking down the street, it says, look, there's a Starbucks that you want to go to, or down that way can grab yourself you can go to the workout places on that, whatever it is. That to me that looks more interesting because the VR stuff for a lot of us
That's pretty.
is going to be, literally make us sick. They say that it's, for people like me who have inner ear issues, it's going to be a real struggle. This is that Ringly thing that you were talking about. But anyway, go back to your opinion. What about HoloLens?
HoloLens, I like it. I think HoloLens will be, it'll be good in the home. I can definitely see schools moving to it, especially for driver's ed. You can totally see schools using it for driver's ed. What I don't see with HoloLens, at least until it gets a little bit smaller, it kind of has to become what Google Glass was, something that's a lot smaller, way better battery life, before it's the everyday thing. But I definitely can see it even as almost replacing an Xbox, for our folks who just have a single person home, or not too many folks in the home kind of thing. It's pretty cool. It's really cool.
All of these would be interesting. I could think about ways that church or Bible software companies could take use of, especially like the virtual reality. You want to get a virtual tour of what the temple looked like in Solomon's temple, or Herod's temple in Jesus' day. Would you like to take the steps, walk the Via Dolorosa along with Jesus Christ? What would that have looked like? And I think that could be real interesting. And then the HoloLens, which is more of an augmented reality, where you're seeing your environment with some things that augment it. I could see the church, if this became something that is pervasive, so that like most people had it. I could see if there was some way to quickly and cost effectively publish to it. I could see a pastor, churches wouldn't need projectors anymore because there's the lyrics are popping up right in front of their face, even though they're not on a wall anywhere. That could be something cool. Churches don't have to put these ugly projectors and clear a huge wall anymore. They've got it. People have got it, popping right off of their glass or that kind of thing.
We'll see. When you say that, it reminds me of something I once thought. That's like, well, if everybody has a screen already, we should already be able to project to their screens. That would be really cool. Project to their mobiles.
You can do that. YouVersion, their Bible app, and this also works with Logos and their Proclaim software. If people have the Logos or Faith Life Study Bible app on their phone, you can put those kinds of things on the phone app again. So that's actually doable right now if you could train all your people. Nice. Look, here's what we're going to sometime in 3 months from now. Make certain do all of you have a smartphone, or do you have someone in your family who's got a tablet that you could keep in front of you? But then now they're looking down again, and one of the beauties I think of having the lyrics on the wall is you're still looking up.
Is everybody looking up?
You're not down in your own little world. You're up with the community, and I think that's a minor benefit of it, but there is a benefit of it there.
Yeah, it is.
That's interesting.
Well, and that's what's one of the things I think wearables are going to allow us to do. Wearables are going to kind of allow us to have a heads-up computing culture. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
You don't really have to keep your head down. I mean, like I said, I'm not in the smartwatch thing on the smartwatch side when it comes to notifications, because I've really developed a discipline of not paying attention to notifications. My phone does not beep at me incessantly for stuff. It only buzzes when I pick it up. My tablet, I turn every notification off. Everything is turned off on my tablet. with the exception of certain times a day where I know that I have an open mind to be provoked. And so without those disciplines, I think wearables really kind of have a really good space in teaching us to develop a heads up way of existence, where we kind of look at what's around us and live in the world around us, not just live through the world.
Well, Antoine, I think that we are coming up on our hour, so I think we're going to shut this down. I did want to just mention one more quick thing to folks, not really spiritual or church related, but if you're a Mac user and an Office user, go out and get the Office for Mac preview. You can get Office totally free, at least for a little while. Check it out. It's a huge download, a couple gigabytes, but I've started using it on my Macs. I've got a Mac Mini and a MacBook Pro, and one of the biggest disappointments in Mac Office for Mac is that it's not integrated with OneDrive, which is pretty fancy and pretty handy. Fancy. I meant handy is the term I intended to say. So if you use that, go for it. I know a lot of people say, why would I want Office anymore when I can get Google Docs or Open Office for free or something like that? And of course, then there's guys like Wes who wants to write everything in Markdown. So for him, he doesn't need all this. But anyway, I just wanted to mention that to folks that they might be interested in. I've been looking forward to this. Are you an Office user?
Amongst many things, I use Office more when I'm training folks than anything else. I've been around 365 a whole lot, Office 365 a lot lately, and it's finally where my brain was 10, 20 years ago with this stuff. Like, oh, good, it's now easy to use.
Yeah, the one thing that drives me nuts is I have a setup template with my own personal keyboard shortcuts to quickly add styles to things, and there still is not a good way to sync your template, your default template on Word between multiple computers. If you use something like OneNote to do it, it sometimes will flag that default template as read-only, and you can't. When you open up the file, it messes things up. So if anybody out there knows a good way to easily sync your normal template in Word, let me know. Well, anyway, that's going to be our Theotek podcast today, number 15, and I've actually been talking to a few different folks about lining up some special guests over the next few weeks. We may have some next week and the following. I won't say who yet because I don't know for sure, but I'm excited about it. One of them is an old friend of mine who's heavily into using technology in his ministry at a fairly good-sized church up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. He's going to be coming with us a little bit, and his name is Paul Culbertson. He'll be with us sometime in the next few weeks, but I don't know who will be with us next week. Hopefully Wes will be back, and hopefully both Antoine and I will be able to be here next week, and we'll talk about church and Bible technology. Thanks for joining us this week. Thanks, Antoine. We'll see all of you later.
All right, sir. See y'all later.